So you've written your body paragraphs, you've drafted a conclusion, and way back when you did your first kind of schematic outline, you actually drafted an intro. And if you recall, the intro was the section where you explained what the two terms in the tension mean. What does this idea of, in the case of the example I'm about to show you, nature as transcendent and nature as commodity mean? So what you want to do is, at the end of that intro, you now want to add a thesis statement. And we're going to work in this video on how to do that. And this is something I practiced with many of you during the oral exam, but not all of you. So I want to kind of review it one more time. So the first step we're going to take is we're going to put our 4 artifacts on a tension spectrum. So you'll notice here that I have created a spectrum with nature as transcendent at one end and nature as commodity at another. And you should do the same thing. You should actually write this out this way so you can practice it. So whatever your two terms are, community on the left, individualism on the right, whatever, however you did it, racial hierarchy, racial equality, whatever tension you chose, you set it up as a spectrum. And then you look at your 4 works of art and you align them with where they fall on the spectrum. So if one of mine is a Jackson Pollock painting, and I see that painting as primarily about nature as transcendent, I'm going to line that up under nature as transcendent. And then if I have another work of art, in this case it's a painting, that sees nature as a commodity, I'm going to put that under nature as a commodity. So you'll notice that on my spectrum I have 1 on one side, 1 on the other. Now you don't have to do that. It just happens to be the way it plays out. You could end up with all of yours on one end of the spectrum or the other, or all of them in the middle where you see both elements. There's no rule. You just have to chart out where they fall. In fact, 2 of the works of art that I want to talk about, they're both sculptures, actually fall in the middle. They see nature as transcendent and as a commodity, often simultaneously. And so when I look at the spectrum of my artifacts, I see, I don't want to do that. I see 4 different artifacts falling in different places, from emphasizing nature as transcendent through a mix of transcendent and commodity to emphasizing commodity. Your tension may be different. Your artifacts may flow differently. They could all be on one side, they could all be on the other side, they could all be in the middle, or some other kind of mix. The point is, you want to organize them this way and write out this spectrum so you can see where your artifacts fall. Now, once you've created the spectrum, the next thing is to draft a setup sentence. In other words, you've created most of the paragraph where you've defined the terms in your tension. Here's what this means, here's what this means. To move from those sentences defining the tension to a thesis, you're going to need a transitional type of sentence. So if we think about me having an intro paragraph that defines what it means to say nature is transcendent versus nature is commodity, after I've defined those 2 terms separately and talked about they intersect, then I move to a transitional sentence. So in this case, my thing is 20th century artists have approached this tension between nature as transcendent and nature as a commodity in many different ways. So it just moves from the terms to the idea that artists have engaged with the terms. And that's the transitional sentence. You're going to want some kind of transition between your definition of the terms in the spectrum that now currently makes up your intro to the thesis, where you're really going to nail what these works of art are saying. So then you're going to write a thesis. And so if we think about the paintings that I've seen and where they fall on the spectrum, you can see that my thesis probably needs 2 sentences. In the first sentence, I basically talk about the 2 works that are at the 2 ends of the spectrum. And you can pause and read that. I don't have to read it out loud to you, and you can pause the video if you need to. And then the second sentence of my thesis talks about the works of art that are in the middle. These works here. So because of how complicated my spectrum is, I end up needing a 2-sentence thesis. But it doesn't have to be that way. Let's imagine that all of my artifacts were on one side. Let's say all 4 of my artifacts suggested that nature was transcendent. Well, then I can have a very simple thesis like this one. Oops, let me fix that. Very simple thesis like this one, right? Where I just say, all these artists see nature as transcendent over commodified. And I'm still using both terms from my tension, but I'm not arguing that they're in different places because I don't see them that way. Now, that's kind of unusual, but it can happen. Another way things can happen is a simpler mix, where maybe none of them are in the middle and all of them are on one side or the other. So in this case, looks like I misspelled Pollock. I have the painters on the one side who see nature as transcendent, Pollock and Hague, and the sculptors on the other side who see nature as commodified. So again, like I'm always doing with my claims, in my thesis, I'm using both terms. But a thesis can play out a lot of different ways. If I have a very complicated spectrum, like the one I presented as a model, where I've got things on both ends and then some things in the middle, then I'm going to need a more complicated thesis, probably 2 sentences to sum that up. If I have a simpler spectrum, everything on one end, or a split with 2 on one end and 2 on the other, then my thesis is going to be simpler. So you can see here different model thesis sentences that allow you to look at different ways of seeing where artifacts fall on the spectrum between the values at the ends of the spectrum. And your thesis statement is ultimately going to want to tell your reader, this is where I see these works of art I'm discussing falling on that spectrum. And what we're doing here is the synthesis part of the course. Right from the start, we've said one of our goals is to synthesize an argument. In other words, synthesize claims into an argument. So we have 4 different claims about 4 different works of art. Our thesis allows us to pull those claims together and provide our reader with an umbrella. I hope this is helpful. Take some time to watch this video a couple times if you need to, and don't hesitate to text me or email me a thesis statement to see if it's working for you. Okay, good luck with this. I look forward to seeing your work.